Picture this: the morning skies over America, empty. From New York to Los Angeles, from Miami to Chicago, not a single commercial jet is cleared to leave the ground. The roar of engines silenced. For the first time since September 11th, 2001, the United States halts every single departure. But this time, there's no hijacking, no terror threat, no storm, just one hidden crack inside the system. A glitch so small, so ordinary it should have gone unnoticed. Yet, within hours, it managed to freeze the most powerful aviation network on Earth. The last time something like this happened, fighter jets patrolled empty skies. This time, it was something far stranger. Not an attack, not the weather, a technical collapse buried deep in the foundations of flight. The contradiction was staggering. The safest way to fly was not to fly at all. The morning of January 11th began like any other. Red-eye flights were already descending into East Coast hubs. Pilots were briefing crews for the first departures of the day. But sometime in the overnight hours, deep inside the FAA's network, something critical failed. At first, controllers tried to route around the problem. They activated a backup system, hoping it could keep the nation moving. But as data fed through, anomalies started appearing. Something wasn't right. By 7:30 a.m., the risk was undeniable. If NOTAM messages weren't trustworthy, if hazard warnings were corrupted or missing, every flight in the sky was potentially vulnerable. That's when the order came: a nationwide ground stop. Every single departure frozen in place. Flights already airborne could continue to their destinations, but no new takeoffs were allowed. In real time, the largest air travel market on the planet had been switched off. The pause would last about 90 minutes. On paper, a blip. In reality, the ripple effects were devastating. Airports seized up. Airlines scrambled to reposition crews and aircraft, and the aftershock stretched far beyond that morning, echoing for days. But here's where the story turns catastrophic. The failure wasn't caused by hackers. It wasn't a foreign cyber attack. It wasn't even sophisticated. It was human. A contractor working on routine maintenance had mishandled a file. One mistaken deletion, one corrupted update, and the FAA's entire NOTAM network collapsed. Even worse, the backup database had been synced to the same file, mirroring the corruption. The safety net tore at the same time as the system it was meant to protect. Spatial Front Incorporated, the contractor in question, became the focus of outrage. FAA officials admitted their procedures weren't followed. One misstep had cascaded into a nationwide shutdown. A lawmaker called it bluntly an honest mistake that cost the country millions. Another, less charitable, summed it up in 3 words: just purely a screw-up. And in aviation, where redundancy is sacred, the idea that one engineer could take down the whole system was unthinkable. Meanwhile, in airports across the country, chaos erupted. By mid-morning, more than 11,000 flights were delayed or cancelled. 40% or more of the schedules at airlines like Delta, United, American, and Southwest were wiped out. Departure boards turned red with cancellations. Passengers sprinted to gates, only to find their flights weren't going anywhere. At one airport in South Carolina, an employee described the scene: travelers running breathlessly to board, then trudging back minutes later to the food court, stranded. Even airline staff were caught off guard. Many didn't realize the FAA had frozen the skies, giving passengers conflicting messages. But here's the wild part: the system itself was back online within 90 minutes. Yet the human side of aviation, the crews, the aircraft, the passengers, took days to recover. The sheer scale was staggering. By day's end, over 10,000 flights delayed, more than 1,300 cancelled outright, and the mess didn't vanish once flights resumed. Crews were out of position. Planes were parked in the wrong cities. Residual delays bled into January 12th as the system slowly untangled itself. The US Travel Association called the outage catastrophic. Analysts compared it directly to the shutdown after 9/11, not in cause, but in impact, the second largest grounding in American history, all because of a technical collapse. The difference this time: no lives lost, no mid-air disasters. Safety, at least, was preserved. But the cost in time, money, and public trust was enormous. And this raised a darker question: if stranding passengers was the safe option, what nightmare was the FAA trying to prevent in the skies? Inside the Department of Transportation, alarms had already gone off. Secretary Pete Buttigieg was woken early. By sunrise, he was fielding calls, making one of the toughest decisions of his tenure: stop every plane or risk letting corrupted data slip into the cockpit. He called the ground stop the right call. Better to strand passengers than gamble with their lives. Behind the scenes, FAA engineers had worked through the night, trying trying to reboot the NOTAM system, but when discrepancies appeared in the backup feed, they realized they couldn't guarantee accuracy. That triggered the 7:30 freeze. Only after a full validation process, after every stream of data was checked and confirmed, did they allow departures to resume between 8:30 and 9. At the White House, President Biden was briefed immediately. He ordered a formal investigation into how such a fragile failure could paralyze an entire nation's airspace. Reporters pressed him on whether it was a cyber attack. He repeated the same line as the FAA. There was no evidence of foul play, just a failure, just human error. For travelers on the ground, that explanation didn't ease the frustration. Families missed funerals, business travelers lost deals, vacations collapsed before they began. Airlines faced millions in losses, scrambling to rebook passengers and reposition planes. And as images of stranded crowds filled television screens, the question began to take shape. If one file can ground America, what else could? And that question would ignite something even bigger: political fury, investigations, and calls for reform. Congress wasted no time sharpening its knives. Within days, more than 120 lawmakers signed their names to a blistering letter. The message was clear: a nationwide outage of America's aviation backbone was, in their words, completely unacceptable. The same halls of power that had debated air traffic safety after 9/11 were suddenly filled with questions about a corrupted data file. How could something so simple, so preventable, unravel the entire system? The House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee set the stage for what promised to be a reckoning. But here's the part that stunned lawmakers even more. Trained professionals had still let this happen. Representative Rick Larsen, a Democrat from Washington State and the committee's ranking member, could barely contain his disbelief. The acting head of the FAA, Billy Nolan, was summoned to testify. Facing lawmakers, he explained how the deletion occurred, how the backup failed, and what measures had been taken since. He confirmed the contractor's access had been revoked, admitting the chain of custody around such a critical system would have to be reconsidered. But as much as Nolan worked to reassure Congress, the damage was already done. The perception was set. The FAA had lost credibility, and its leadership would have to fight to win it back. And if Larsen's disbelief was sharp, the blow from the other side of the aisle cut even deeper. This raised a harsher question: could the FAA even be trusted at all? Representative Sam Graves, the Republican chairman of the same committee, was even more blunt. He warned that until real reforms were put in place, he was skeptical the FAA could be trusted to manage the modernization America's aviation desperately needed. In his words, there was no way to sugarcoat it. Until proven otherwise, the FAA's competence was in question. This wasn't just political theater. The outage hit in the middle of FAA reauthorization debates, where lawmakers decide the agency's funding and future priorities. Suddenly, what might have been routine negotiations turned into a battlefield over technology and modernization. The hearings became less about dollars and cents and more about survival. The question lawmakers asked wasn't just how this outage happened, but whether the FAA was capable of preventing the next one. But the truth was, everyone already knew part of the answer. America's aviation backbone depended on code first written when the Cold War was still underway, and the plan to replace it not until 2025, which meant that on January 11th, 2023, the most advanced aviation market on Earth was running on technology designed for another era, an era long gone. Inside FAA budget documents, there had been warnings. The agency had requested $29.4 million to accelerate NOTAM modernization. It was, in hindsight, a prophetic ask. But until the outage hit, those requests hadn't been a national priority. Lawmakers didn't fully understand that the same system that warns pilots of a closed runway or a broken approach light was still running on technology older than most of the passengers in the terminals. After the outage, the urgency could no longer be ignored. The FAA scrambled to implement immediate safeguards. The most important one was deceptively simple: a 1-hour synchronization delay between the live database and its backup. No more instant mirroring that could replicate a corrupted file across both systems in seconds. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't flashy, but it was the first layer of protection against another catastrophic deletion. Beyond that, attention turned toward the long-term fix: a cloud-based NOTAM platform, something something resilient, distributed, and far less prone to single-point collapse. The outage that embarrassed the FAA also accelerated its modernization schedule. Suddenly, what was supposed to take years had to happen much faster. Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, was candid about the stakes. He warned against playing what he called whack-a-mole with technology failures, patching one vulnerability at a time until the next collapse exposed another. What was needed, he argued, was a comprehensive overhaul, not band-aids. The FAA, he insisted, had to rebuild its digital foundations from the ground up, not just repair cracks in the old walls. For the aviation industry, the outage became something larger than a bad morning. It was a wake-up call. If the US system, with its resources and history of safety, could be grounded by one file, what did that mean for the broader fragility of infrastructure everywhere? Airlines that prided themselves on redundancy suddenly had to admit the very government system they depended on was a single point of failure. Even though the skies reopened that morning, the questions have never fully closed. Every passenger stranded in an airport chair, every executive watching red ink spill across balance sheets, all of them learned the same lesson at once. Safety had been preserved, but at the price of trust.